We humans are a social species. From the moment we're born, already we depend on others. Not just for food and shelter, but also for meaning, identity, and belonging. This behaviour isn't unique to humans, of course. Many animal species rely on tight-knit family units to cooperate and thrive. But we humans seem to be able to do it on a whole other level. We form bonds with complete strangers. We build teams, tribes, and nations, unified not by blood, but by shared symbols. So what makes this possible? In the 1990s, anthropologist Robin Dunbar began investigating the link between brain size and social behaviour in various primate species. Specifically, he started looking at the relationship between the size of the neocortex, the part of the brain responsible for higher order thinking, and the typical group sizes that different primates could maintain. Most primates live in groups of around 20 to 50 individuals. Chimpanzees, our closest ancestors, manage communities of around 60. Baboons can stretch that number up to 80 or 90, but even they begin to splinter beyond that. According to Dunbar's research, the human brain, with the largest neocortex of all, should be able to maintain stable social relationships with around 150 individuals. And for most of human history, that probably held true. Most hunter-gatherer societies throughout history, and even some that are still observed today, tended to live in tight-knit groups, usually between 20 to 50 individuals, with wider social networks extending to around 100 to 150. This very closely matches Dunbar's number, the theoretical cognitive limit on how many stable relationships a member of our species can maintain. But clearly this no longer holds true. We now live in cities populated with millions of people. We cooperate with total strangers on a day-to-day basis. We pay taxes, follow laws, and march shoulder to shoulder with people we've never met, for leaders that we probably didn't even vote for, all while believing in shared stories, symbols, and values. So the question is this: what changed? How did we scale up? How did small bands of primates, bound together by gossip and face-to-face trust, transform into nations, armies, and civilizations? One compelling answer seems to be religion. Religion didn't just give us gods to worship, it gave us a way to belong. Through shared rituals, moral codes, sacred narratives, and a sense of divine watchfulness, religion allowed us to create moral communities, tight-knit groups of people who trusted one another, not because they were kin, but because they shared belief. It gave us a framework to cooperate, coordinate, and to punish those who betrayed the group. In this final episode, we'll be exploring the social origins of religion, not as an explanation for the natural world, but as a technology for building societies. From firelit rituals and ancestor spirits to temples, tithes, and commandments, this is the story not of how faith bound us to our gods, but of how it bound us to each other. Good morning and welcome to the channel. My name is Thibault and I make videos on philosophy and science. Following our previous episodes on both the psychological and cultural origins of religion, today we'll be exploring its social roots, how religion emerged as a means to unify people around coherent narratives, and how this eventually helped shape our societies throughout history. If the psychological roots of religion can help us understand why our minds are drawn to gods and spirits, and the cultural origins how those gods then became vessels for meaning and understanding, then its social roots will show us how religion transformed a scattering of humans into tribes, nations, and civilizations. Across time and geography, religions have often spread like wildfire, not because they explain the unexplainable, but because they help to organize us. They mark who we are, what we stand for, and where we belong. In this video, we'll be looking at how religion emerged to structure and unify groups of humans as social beings, how ideas became institutions, how belief became bond, and how myth became the mortar of human cooperation. From us versus theming to the synchrony of our shared consciousness, this is the story not of how our myths were made, but of how those myths made us. For most of our evolutionary history, survival meant sticking with your in-group. You hunted, gathered, and protected one another. You shared stories around a campfire, watched each other's children, and buried your dead together. From an evolutionary standpoint, this was an excellent strategy. The more you helped your kin, the more likely your own DNA was to be passed on. As the biologist J.B.S. Haldane once joked, he'd gladly lay down his life for 8 cousins or 2 brothers, because genetically speaking, these are roughly equivalent. Back in the days when social groups were essentially just extended families, trust was face-to-face, cooperation was built on familiarity, and betrayal could often mean exile, or worse. But as human communities continued to grow, that kind of personal trust became harder to scale. You can't share a meal or a memory with 150 people every day. And beyond that number, beyond what anthropologist Robin Dunbar calls our cognitive limit, relationships begin to fray. Suspicion creeps in. Coordination breaks down. So then how do you build trust with someone you don't know? You create symbolic bonds. Imagine you're walking down the street, minding your own business, when suddenly a stranger bumps into you. You look up, ready to exchange either fists or an awkward apology, but then you notice that both of you are wearing a t-shirt with the exact same band name on it. Immediately, something shifts. That person is no longer just a stranger to you. They're one of your people. By adhering to shared symbols, we can connect with complete strangers on a deeper spiritual level. This allows us to connect and cooperate with people that we might otherwise have no affiliations with. In one simulated evacuation of the London Underground, for example, researchers found that participants were actually far more likely to cooperate than what might have initially been anticipated. Because people that share the London Underground are for the most part complete strangers to one another, you'd expect them not to cooperate in the case of a sudden emergency. However, in reality what happens is that the crisis immediately creates a common sense of identity, a feeling of we're in this together, and even more so if the person next to you also happens to be wearing a football jersey with your favourite team on it. A simple symbol, but enough to spark empathy and prosocial behaviour. And religion gave us one of the earliest and most powerful tools to do just that. Shared gods, rituals, and taboos became social glue. A way to say, you and I believe in the same things. That means that I can trust you. And in the face of adversity, those that stand together stand a fighting chance. Émile Durkheim, the father of modern sociology, argued that religion wasn't just about belief, it was about belonging. By separating the sacred from the ordinary, religious rituals helped mark out a special identity, one that extended far beyond family ties. These symbols and ceremonies were a way to define who was us and who was not. And by cooperating on a grander scale than just your extended family, humans were able to achieve much more. In a small band of hunter-gatherers, you might have a skilled tracker, a toolmaker, and somebody who knows how to tan hides. But in a society bound by shared mythology, the ability to hyper-specialize becomes exponentially greater. Now you can build pyramids, organize armies, and construct cathedrals that take generations to complete. Shared symbols allowed us to synchronize with strangers, to trust and collaborate across time and distance in a way that biology alone never could. From clans and cults to nations and fan bases, the belief in shared symbols allowed humans to unite under common banners, even with complete strangers. But being part of an us almost always comes with the shadow of a them, because the moment we begin defining who we are, we also define who we are not. Religion, as a shared system of belief, became one of the most powerful tools for drawing these lines. Not just between the sacred and the profane, but between the insider and the outsider, the believer and the heretic, the chosen people and everyone else. Some scholars even suggest that ancient dietary restrictions may have also helped to reinforce group identity. For instance, the Jewish prohibition on pork may have originally helped to distinguish them from their pork-eating neighbours such as the Philistines. Similarly, the Islamic ban on alcohol may have acted in part as a symbolic rejection of Christian rituals, such as the Eucharist, which involves wine as a symbol for Christ's blood. This behaviour is what psychologists and anthropologists refer to as us versus theming. It's a basic cognitive mechanism. Our brains are wired to detect group membership, to feel safe among our own, and to be wary of the other. Religion amplified this tendency, giving it symbols, rituals, and sacred justification. Dietary rules, clothing, taboos, languages and holidays. These weren't just spiritual practices anymore. They were social markers, ways of signaling group loyalty, ways of saying, I'm one of you, I belong. But shared identity is only the beginning. If religion helped define who we are, it also helped decide how we should behave. Because once you're part of a group, the real challenge isn't belonging, it's proving it. Belonging is powerful, but belonging without commitment is fragile at best. In small groups, reputation was everything. If you lied, stole, or slacked off, everybody knew, and consequences came quickly. But in larger communities, freeloaders could more easily slip through the cracks. You could enjoy the benefits of the group without having to pay the costs. You could claim the identity without necessarily living up to it. So how do you get people to truly commit, to follow the rules, share the load, and to stay loyal, even when nobody is watching? For this, religion found a clever solution: make belief visible. Painful rituals, strict taboos, and costly sacrifices soon became proof of your devotion. Take circumcision, for example. To an outsider, it might seem like a rather brutal or arbitrary practice, but to an insider, it's a powerful signal. I'm one of you, I've paid the price. Practices like this aren't just tests of faith, they're tests of loyalty. If you were willing to sacrifice and suffer for the group, or for the gods, it meant that you were serious. But that's not all. As gods grew bigger, so too did their powers, and soon, people began believing in gods who didn't just reward the faithful, but who punished the wicked too. Even in secret, even after death. Through stories, symbols, and supernatural surveillance, religion became a force for cooperation and control, shaping not only what people believed, but how they behaved. These so-called moralizing gods weren't just creators or nature spirits, they were cosmic judges. They cared whether you lied, cheated, or hurt others. And crucially, they were always watching. This belief alone could have a powerful effect, because if you believe that somebody is watching you, you're more likely to play by the rules. It's like having a constant surveillance camera in your mind, tied not to the police, but to the divine, a kind of spiritual panopticon. And psychologist Ara Norenzayan and colleagues have found compelling evidence for this. In a series of cross-cultural experiments, they showed that people who believed in punishing all-knowing gods tended to be more generous and cooperative, even with strangers. The more people believed their god cared about morality and could see their actions, the more prosocially people would behave. In fact, Norenzayan argues that belief in these big gods may have played a key role in allowing large anonymous societies to function in the first place. Because when humans started believing that cheating could hurt their soul, not just their reputation, cooperation scaled in entirely new ways. In a village, you can rely on gossip and face-to-face accountability. But in a sprawling civilization, you need something bigger. Something that convinces people to play by the rules, even when no one is watching. This is where Norenzayan's idea of big gods really comes in. If you think that there is an invisible judge always watching, ready to reward or punish, then you're more likely to keep your word, to pay your taxes, and to treat others fairly. Not because of social pressure, but because the gods demand it. By making belief visible and behavior accountable, religion didn't just foster group loyalty, it solved the trust problem at scale. Through costly rituals and ever-watching gods, it bound people together, enforced norms, and kept freeloaders in check. But the real test of religion was yet to come. Because as humans began to settle, farm, and build, they needed more than just shared belief and identity. They needed systems, hierarchies, laws, and institutions, and the authority to enforce them. And once again, religion was ready. For most of human history, we lived in small mobile bands, maybe a few dozen people at most. But something began to change around 10,000 years ago. We began to farm, settle, and build. Villages grew into towns, towns into cities, and cities became empires. But with this new scale came new problems. How do you rule over thousands, if not millions of people, who don't even know each other? Famously, in the words of Charles de Gaulle, how do you rule over a country that has 246 different kinds of cheese? Once again, religion had the answer, not just as belief, but as infrastructure. It offered a ready-made toolkit for social cohesion, a shared language of rituals, values, and sacred rules that could bind massive populations together, even across vast distances and cultural divides. As we've seen with Norenzayan's idea of big gods, one of the key elements was trust. But trust alone wasn't enough. As societies grew more complex, they needed structure, a system for handling conflict, distributing power, and organizing daily life. And so religion became law. From the Torah to the Sharia or Dharma, many of the world's earliest legal systems were explicitly religious in nature. They didn't just tell people how to behave, they told them how the universe worked, who was in charge, and why certain rules cannot be questioned. These sacred codes created a sense of cosmic justice, where obedience wasn't just socially beneficial, it was divinely ordained. And with that divine authority came a new kind of power. Priests crowned kings, and kings ruled by divine authority. Even in ancient Greece, rulers would consult the oracle at Delphi to validate their decisions. Divine endorsement wasn't optional, it was essential. Temples weren't just places of worship, they were centers of economic, political, and judicial life. Religions gave rulers legitimacy, and their subjects a reason to obey. In ancient Mesopotamia, for example, the Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, didn't just explain how the world began, it also explained why it was Babylon that should rule it. In this myth, the gods must decide on who of them shall face Tiamat, the terrifying sea serpent of chaos, in combat. Marduk, a divinity representing the identity and city-state of Babylon, agrees on the condition that he is to be named King of the Gods, with Babylon his earthly throne. The message to other city-states was clear. Babylon's dominance wasn't just political, it was cosmic destiny. And thus, during the reign of Hammurabi, Babylon went from being a modest city-state to one of the earliest true empires in recorded history. Now, I've often heard the argument that religions were created in order to control populations and keep those in power, but I think that this is giving way too much credit to our ancient rulers. It's not that they created these religions in order to maintain their social status. It's just that religions naturally emerged as a means to unify peoples around coherent narratives, and the emergence of a singular ruling class was just one of the most convenient forms of social hierarchy to rule over larger populations. For example, Athens is famously known as an ancient democratic state, but without sufficient technology, such a system of governance just doesn't really work at larger scales. In places like Athens, citizens could physically gather to vote, debate, and participate in public life. But as states expanded, administration, travel, and information flow became too slow for this kind of direct democratic process. And so rule typically shifted to monarchies, oligarchies, and bureaucracies, where power could be centralized and exercised without mass participation. At the city-state level, you could assuredly function as an independent democratic entity. But when the entire might of an empire ruled by a king of kings begins to fall upon you, you don't really have much choice but to find some larger symbolic marker of identity for you and your allies to unite around. From the pharaohs of Egypt to the emperors of China, sacred authority and state power became deeply intertwined. To challenge the king was to challenge the gods, and for centuries, sometimes millennia, this fusion of faith and politics helped hold entire civilizations together. But perhaps the most important function of religion wasn't just spiritual or legal, but systemic. Not just a belief in gods, but a full-stack social operating system. A toolkit for unity, trust, and coordination at scale. It encoded a civilization's deepest values, regulated its rhythms through ritual, and provided the emotional software for belonging. It could motivate armies, justify empires, and turn strangers into brothers. Where laws enforced behavior from the outside, religion shaped behavior from within, aligning minds around shared purpose, identity, and myth. And in that sense, religion wasn't just part of the system, it was the system. The invisible architecture that made large-scale human cooperation possible, long before written constitutions, broadcast media, or centralized bureaucracies. And to understand just how powerful that architecture was, it helps to look beyond human societies and into nature itself. In nature, certain creatures seem to blur the line between individual and collective. An ant, on its own, doesn't do much. But together, these tiny little organisms form vast colonies that behave like singular wholes, large systems capable of building, defending, and adapting. In a sense, a superorganism. In order to act as a collective entity, ants communicate through pheromones. They synchronize their behavior and will sacrifice themselves without hesitation. Any individual ant is expendable. What matters is the colony. In biology, this pattern holds true at every scale. A single cell has its own individual structure, boundaries, and function. But inside a body, that identity dissolves. The cell lives, acts, and often dies for the sake of something greater, the organism. In multicellular life, individuality is subordinated to a shared purpose. Now scale up. What cells are to the body, and ants are to the colony, humans became to the tribe. And religion, in many ways, was the organizing force that allowed that to happen. We humans, of course, don't trade in pheromones. We trade in ideas. Unlike ants whose cohesion comes from instinct and chemistry, human cooperation depends on shared meaning. When two people exchange a piece of paper for food, labor, or services, that transaction only works because both of them believe that the paper has value. Strip away that shared belief, and the money becomes meaningless, just ink on a paper. The cooperation collapses. Shared beliefs, rituals, and stories became the glue that bound us together. They synchronized our behavior, aligned our goals, and made us feel like we were a part of something greater than ourselves. A tribe, a nation, a people. This is the human version of the superorganism. A mind held together not by scent, but by symbol. But symbols alone weren't enough. For a tribe to truly function as one, to think, feel, and act together, something more was needed. Shared performance. Embodied belief. Crucially, religious practice isn't just passive. It's not just about what you believe. It's about what you perform. Through prayer, song, fasting, processions, and pilgrimage, religions gave people a way to act and move as one. This is known as ritual synchrony, the process by which groups align their behavior, physically and emotionally, through shared ritual. And when we move in sync, something magical happens. We begin to feel in sync too. Studies show that people who chant, dance, or march together report greater trust, more empathy, and stronger social bonds. In a way, a kind of social glue is formed, almost as if our minds themselves were beginning to synchronize. Ritual doesn't just express unity, it creates it. This is what sociologist Émile Durkheim called collective effervescence, that electric feeling we get when we lose ourselves in the crowd. In those moments, the individual dissolves into something greater than themselves. Religion for Durkheim was not just about gods or doctrines. It was about the formation of a collective consciousness, a shared sense of meaning, morality, and belonging. In those moments of transcendence, something ancient awakens. We are no longer just individuals, but part of something sacred. So, did we create religion, or did religion create us? Religions are more than just stories about gods. They are stories that take hold of us, that bind us, and that live through us. Religion doesn't just offer comfort to individuals, it connects them. It turns separate minds into a grand synchronized collective, a kind of superorganism. It draws the line between us and them, between believer and heretic, sacred and profane. From shared rituals to sacred laws, from symbolic meaning to moral cohesion, religion may have acted like a social operating system, a set of shared illusions that allowed us to synchronize our collective consciences. Psychologically, humans are wired for coalitional thinking. We quickly form in-groups and out-groups, and we're more likely to trust, protect, and empathize with those who share our own markers of identity. In a world of scattered bands and competing tribes, religion offered us a way to recognize who was part of our moral circle and who wasn't. This ability to scale up identity, from kin to clan and nation, was crucial for early cooperation. and religion gave us the tools to do it. It offered us not only a place in the world, but a place among others. By synchronizing our behavior through shared rituals and belief, religion allowed early human groups to function as coordinated units, something greater than the sum of their parts. Because once people believe they are part of something eternal, a divine order, a chosen people, a cosmic battle, they will act not as individuals, but as cells in a larger body. They will conform, cooperate, and when called upon, they will sacrifice. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I've been your host Thibault, and until next time, stay curious.